Hello, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenny. Glad you could watch the program today. Today we're doing interviews with candidates for graduation from the West Virginia School of Preaching. On this program, I'll be interviewing DJ Kessinger. DJ, thanks for being on the program with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, David.
Obviously Kessinger family is well known in the Ohio Valley. Your father I've known for a little while, and I don't know that I've met your grandfather or not. But why don't you tell them a little bit about your family and sort of the background of preaching that your family's enjoyed.
Oh, sure. Well, both of my grandfathers and my father, they were all preachers. And I believe both of my grandfathers actually came out of denominationalism. And as far as my father goes, of course, he was raised in a Christian household. And so I was sort of given a whole lot of advantages in that sense. And I was always very grateful for that. Dad had, he's been preaching just about all my life. He started preaching at Proctor Church of Christ, I believe, and while I was growing up, he preached at Dewey Avenue Church of Christ in St. Mary's for about 20 years, and he's now preaching at Mount Alto. And so there's a very bit of a tradition, I guess you could say, with preaching in my family.
Well, great. I was looking at the publishing piece issue of the paper, the Andy Robinson, he did a profile on you. We'll show your picture and the article here, and let me just read a little bit that Andy Robinson wrote about you. He said, one of DJ's greatest assets is his humble combining of his natural speaking ability, interpersonal skills, and theological knowledge. He is confident but not arrogant and always seeking to improve. He never calls attention to himself in a vainglorious way. He is disciplined and methodical about his studies. So, Andy doesn't just throw out words. So those are very high praise. So I'm sure that you've made quite an impression. Like I said, I've known your father. He's always impressive to hear and to see. I know that your father, he does a lot of musical work, not just the singing kind, but also he plays instruments and things like that. Do you have any musical interest yourself?
I do. I'm actually a musician as well. And I play the fiddle, mandolin, and guitar, and my main style is contest fiddling, and so that's, I've been to a few contests. I've never got first place in anything, but I've done all right for myself a few times.
Well,
so
great. Well, great.
Yeah.
When did you, being the son of a preacher, grandson of a preacher, when did you decide that you wanted to be a preacher?
I think it's hard to nail down exactly when I decided I wanted to be a full-time preacher. There was a lot of indecisiveness, especially when I was a teenager. When I was a younger teenager, I wanted to be a full-time musician, and that never really seemed to pan out just right. It's hard to make a living in bluegrass, as it turns out. I think it sort of went as a process. I at first wanted to be one of those guys who preaches maybe part-time for their local congregation, just every once in a while to fill in if the local preacher can't do it. I went from that to maybe going out to some congregations every once in a while who can't do that. And eventually I came to the conclusion, no, I think I ought to be a full-time preacher. And that was a slow process, but I was probably about 20 when I came to the conclusion I should probably be a full-time preacher.
Well, knowing your background and your parents and grandparents and all that, you've obviously had a lot of biblical instruction over the years in your upbringing. But obviously, that kind of level of instruction probably is not the same kind of level of instruction you received at the school. Why don't you talk about that? Because some people think, it's just like going to Sunday morning Bible class. How hard can it be? Well, how hard can it be?
It can be pretty hard. I don't want to exaggerate, and it's easy to exaggerate about it. But sometimes it can be very difficult. Everybody always talks about the bear of the School of Preaching, and that's the Greek class. And while it's definitely doable, you have to put the work into it, and it partially deserves its reputation because of that. It's very difficult. They're trying to, in essence, cram about 4 years of preaching instruction into 2 years. And so we're in class probably around twice as much as, say, a regular college student would be in class. You know, they might be in it 15 or 18 hours a week. Well, we're in it for 30 hours a week. And we start a lot earlier than they do, and we're not going to finish our studies up until June, whereas most college students, they're going to be finished around middle of May. It's very much all of the time. There's very little time for breaks. You sort of have to schedule when you're going to not be working. And I remember the first quarter, it was very different from, because I had attended some college beforehand. And I remember there was some moments when I was sort of thinking to myself, man, I'm procrastinating. I need to hurry up and get something done. And then I realized, oh wait, I'm working on something else. I need to do this. And so it can be a lot to handle. I think if you manage your time properly, it's never overly stressful necessarily, but it's a lot to handle.
You cover all the books of the Bible in this curriculum that you do at the school. Did any books of the Bible, we like them all, but were there any that really, you're like, I really enjoyed studying these books of the Bible, and I really look forward to preaching these books of the Bible? Which ones of those would be, and why?
We actually only just now started studying this one, but it's sort of always been a bit of a favorite of mine, and that's the book of Proverbs. Part of the reason is because it is very intensely practical. You know, it doesn't really leave a lot of room for people to ponder it so much as just instant application. That's something I appreciate about it. Also, as somebody with ADD, the fact that it changes subjects on a dime so much, it is just, it's refreshing to me. You know, it's something that easily keeps my attention. But beyond that, it is something that will be practical for someone who is studying. You know, if you only have 5 minutes to study the Bible for whatever reason, I would normally recommend studying Proverbs. You can apply something to your life right there, and you don't have a problem whatsoever. It's nice.
What about, tell them about some of your instructors, which ones, I mean, obviously you don't want to leave anybody out, and I don't want to put you on the spot to name them all, but what are some of the instructors that you really appreciated and enjoyed and learned from, and about them?
Well, my dad's one of the teachers, so I think I'm obligated to name him as one. And beyond that, there's been so many teachers who have been a very positive influence. That's something else that's been very different from a regular college experience. All of the teachers at the school are preachers, and they aren't really paid. They might get paid for their gas mileage or something like that, but they aren't doing it for the money. And so something that's guaranteed about every single one of those teachers is that they are really dedicated and concerned with you learning the material. That's something I kind of found different from, say, secular college, where a lot of the teachers, they don't really care whether you learn anything or not. That's something I can say for every single one of the teachers. And a lot of the standout teachers have been Jack Gilchrist, Peter Ray Cole, Charles Pugh, Terry Varner, and like I said, like you said, I can't really leave anybody out because they've all been so phenomenal. But those are some of the people who just sort of stand out in my mind. Anyway,
I'm always interested in people that have music ability, probably because I don't think I have any. But I know I've interviewed Andy on the show and worked with Andy on some different projects, and I know that he's written hymns, he's composed, and things like that. Have you done any of that? I mean, what's your?
I have. I've actually, with Andy's help, I've written 2 hymns, and both since I started school. One is titled "Land of Eternal Summer," and it's more or less a song about heaven, relief in once we pass away from this earth. And the other is called "Waters of Salvation." It's an invitation song talking about baptism. And Andy was very helpful with both of those. Of course, he doesn't think he did a whole lot of that, but Andy has a very different musical style than I do. I'm a contest fiddler. He's pretty much the exact opposite. He's very classically trained. I believe my kind of music is what people who play his kind of music refer to as that kind of music. and I have a sense of what the music should be. I kind of have a general idea. I can play it by ear. But as far as knowing the music theory in order to get all the parts together, I don't have a clue about that. And so he was very helpful with that.
Now, do you lead singing?
Yes, I do.
And how's that different from preaching?
Um, in some ways, it's actually similar because I think sometimes we don't give our song leaders enough credit. In a way, even though it's usually prepared by somebody else, they are acting as teachers. You know, when we sing, we're supposed to teach one another with our songs, and so all the songs are going to teach something. And so a song leader is both teaching at one time and also trying to keep it, have musical sense at the same time. I don't want to make it seem like if there's a congregation which is having trouble with their singing, maybe not the best singing in the world, that's not still pleasing to God. But I do believe we ought to all strive to make ourselves the best singers we could be, the best song leaders we can be. And so song leaders have a heavy responsibility. They need to be trying to get everyone to be the best they can be. So like a preacher should be constantly improving in his sermon techniques, the song leader ought to be constantly improving in their song leading techniques. And they have some things that are a lot more concrete than preachers do. You know, you have the hand motions, for example, that has to be exact. That's a pretty universal thing. And it's a discipline, it really is. But there are a lot of similarities in that way.
Well, great. Let me ask you this, church camp. Do you do any church camp work? And what are the kind of things about that made an impression on you growing up?
I was more or less raised at West Virginia Christian Youth Camp. I do not remember a time where I wasn't taken to that camp. Of course, even when I was a baby, my parents both worked at that camp, and so they'd take me along, and they called me and a bunch of the other kids, they called us staff brats. And that's pretty much what I was. And once I got old enough to start going to junior week at camp, I was a camper there junior week, and then I moved on to intermediate week and senior week. Eventually, I started working for there, and I was initially working as a kitchen help for intermediate week, and I kind of went up from there, and I now teach an intermediate week, and I counsel at a few other weeks. Last summer, I believe I ended up working 5 weeks of camp total, and it's because I just love it so much. I think it's one of the best works the church has right now. I love working with the kids, and they all have a blast. All the staff has a blast. And it's just something that's been a part of my life pretty much forever, and it's been very defining for me. I told you I kind of started preaching a little bit when I was a younger teenager. Well, my very first sermon was a campfire sermon at camp when I was 16 years old. And so it's been very influential on me on that. Of course, it's merely speculation, but maybe I wouldn't be preaching right now if it weren't for that camp. You know, it's been very helpful, and I think it's a great thing.
You know, I want to talk a little bit more about the camp experience, since you've had so much camp experience. Sometimes people outside the world, they would view going to church camp, and they would go, I don't want to hear that. But it's not. It's a lot of fun and excitement. Why don't you tell them some of the funny things? And you don't have to incriminate anybody with this. But why don't you tell them some of the funny things that happens at church camp?
I think I can incriminate one person, and that is myself. It is a blast, and some of my favorite people who work at camp are the people who had to be dragged in kicking and screaming because they thought it was just going to be a boring experience, and by the end they don't want to leave. They're crying at campfire on the last night, that sort of thing. A funny experience at camp. I remember a few years ago I was working as a counselor for the all-age week. You know, they have a lot of different weeks, and this one's sort of all ages. And they had us during our break filling up water balloons. And one of the teachers there, Josh Ball, he had a class at a pavilion, and the way the camp is set up, it's basically just on a hill. And where I was filling up water balloons was here on the hill, and the pavilion where he was teaching was down just a little bit. And I was getting a little bored filling up the water balloons, so I figured since he's teaching the high schoolers over there, I'm just a little bit older than they are. I'll give them a quick break from class, make them laugh a little bit, and I'll just throw a water balloon on top of that pavilion. Well, I threw it, and I missed at the top of the pavilion. I ended up hitting a tree right before it, and it burst right there, and it went straight in to the pavilion in the middle of Bible class. And I just heard screaming, and I heard someone yell, "Who did that?" And that's the last thing I knew from it, because I had already bolted up the hill. And it turns out that had actually landed on one of the students' Bibles right when he was getting ready to read, I assume, about the flood. They ended up having to put it in the refrigerator to save it. But there's a lot of fun that happens at camp. A lot of people have something that they love there. There's long sports periods, and there's a little bit of something for everybody.
What do you say to encourage a young person that's never been to camp? Why would they want to come? I mean, what would the things that they'd be afraid of or concerned about or whatever? What would you say to them about church camp, and why would they want to attend such?
You know, it really depends on what they're concerned about. If they're concerned about how exciting it would be, or if they're going to be bored all week, I can pretty much attest to the fact that it never really gets boring, except maybe when you're trying to go to sleep. It makes sense. If they're worried about making friends, I can tell you those kids are incredible. And they are very, very inclusive. They try to make sure that everybody's having a good time. They're very good about noticing if a kid is feeling left out, and they'll try to make him part of the group. And that's something I've seen over and over again. And it's wonderful.
Great. Well, let me ask you some questions going back to preaching.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the congregations you preached for as part of your training, and what did you learn from that?
I've been a little bit of everywhere. A lot of the guys, what they'll do is they take a few commitments while they're there. So maybe every second Sunday they'll be at the same place. I never really did that with any congregation except the Pennsboro congregation, because I'll be working with them once I graduate. But even then, I'm only there every month and a half, and so I don't have that many commitments. And what that's allowed me to do is I've gotten to really spread myself out. I've been just yesterday, in fact, I was over at Ravenswood, West Virginia, which is very south of the school. I've been as far west as mid-Kentucky. I've been as far east as D.C. in Virginia. I've been all the way up north on Lake Erie, and I can't think of where the most southern point I've been, but I've been pretty south as well. And so I've gotten to see all sorts of different kinds of people, and I got to meet all sorts of things. I've gotten to see how different people do different things, and I think that's given me a good idea of what overall the church is like. And it's been very informative, I think.
Now, what kind of congregations did you preach for? You preached for large, small. What did you find interesting about preaching for a larger group versus a smaller group, and that kind of dynamic?
I've preached for everything from about 10 people to 300 right now. And it's, honestly to me, it's just about the same thing. There's no real difference in nerves from my experience from preaching to 10 people and preaching to 300 people. It's pretty much, the actual experience of preaching itself is pretty much the same wherever you go. It might be just because I'm doing most of the work on it. But it was pretty much the same. Where the differences really show up is during the worship services, and how the people will come up to you and that sort of thing. Of course, when you're preaching for a smaller group, that can get a lot more personal, and you can really get to know them better. But it's also good to preach for a larger group. You get to reach more people like that.
Well, great. You're going to do some work with Pennsboro. You mentioned that with Terry Jones there, and I know Terry, and Terry doesn't. If he doesn't do anything well, I don't know it. I mean, that guy is phenomenal. He's great.
He's very dedicated.
So you're really going to enjoy working with him. I'm sure you enjoy having him for class as well.
I have.
Everything he does so superbly, and really enjoy. Let me ask you, what you do music, you do hymn composition, you do church camp, you do preaching. What do you find difficult? I mean, there's difficulty in everything. I
I've always suffered a bit from procrastination, and that's something that I always have trouble with, and that's what gets me more than anything else is just waiting until the last minute. And I was almost late to this interview right now because of procrastination, I suppose. And everything sort of has that difficulty for me. And it's just whenever you need to really buckle down and have discipline, that's when I have trouble. I usually get it done, but it's just something I struggle with, I'd say.
What kind of, you're getting ready to do some preaching here. You've obviously had real good training at the school. You had training your whole life. What kind of themes do you look forward to preaching on?
I like kind of preaching on just about everything. I like preaching the truth. I tend to focus on more philosophical themes, I think. To me, it's very important that we preach not only what is, but why it is. I think a lot of members of the church know what it is. And when I'm edifying, I really try to emphasize not only what it is, but why whatever this is. And so the more philosophical themes, apologetics, ethics, that sort of thing, that's something I tend to gravitate to. But I also like taking something that we might be very familiar with and really breaking it down logically and speaking about that and making sure that people understand this is why we believe. Because I don't think it's enough to just know what is. You know, a lot of, the members of the denominations, they know what is, but most of them don't know why they believe it. If they knew why they believed that, they probably wouldn't believe it anymore. We are lovers of the truth. And if you love the truth and you know the truth, you ought to know why you know the truth. And that's really what I try to bring out in my preaching is the why.
All right. Let me ask, you personally have had a lot of exposure to the West Virginia School of Preaching through through your family, through the location where you grew up and all that. You go to the school, I mean, you obviously know the facilities, you obviously know the congregation, you obviously know, you probably knew all the teachers before you got there, and all that. You have a great familiarity with all that. But was there anything that surprised you that you didn't anticipate about going to the school?
I think I didn't fully anticipate how fun it was going to be. I don't mean to make it sound like it's a party 24/7, but I just honestly wasn't expecting to have a fantastic time. I thought it was going to be 2 years of just buckling down, pulling my hair out, and move on when I'm done with it. I had heard some funny stories from the school, and so I thought, okay, I'd get a laugh every once in a while. But I was not really expecting it to be such a good time. It has absolutely flown by. Now, like I said, it's difficult, and like I said, we have about 9 weeks left, and I'm ready to move on because of how difficult it's been. But it's always going to be a memory that I'm going to treasure. It's going to be among the best years of my life, I can already tell.
So you have no regrets about going?
Absolutely not, no.
And you have no regret, you have no hesitations about recommending somebody else to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Just anybody who is in the position. Now, there are some people I would say, look at other things. If someone's coming out of high school, for example, I would generally try to push them towards maybe one of the Christian colleges, Freed-Hardeman or Harding or something like that, because of the intensity of the school. It was originally built it's a preacher machine, basically, get people out as fast as possible. But for people who were in a position like me, who had kind of already been through college, had already had a secular job, and were really just ready to get out there as quickly as possible and start preaching, this is for you. If you have the work ethic for it and you have the dedication, this is for you.
Great. DJ, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for coming in, and great to be with you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have from Light from Above. Thanks for watching our program. May the Lord bless you. Thanks for watching. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong terms. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the terms, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.
In this world we have